Hey everyone, I'm Elfiles, and welcome back to the WCL. Last time I went over my draft analysis, picked up a team I'm really looking forward to using, and this time we're getting right into week 1. And this week 1 is against SteveChuck and the Waterdeep Wobbuffets. Can't believe we're matching up already. So in the draft analysis, I didn't mention how I did in the last 2 WCL seasons. In those cases, I made it to semifinals both times, but that is where my run ended. And Steve was the one to knock me out of playoffs both of those times. But actually, in all the seasons where I won the whole thing, I did beat him in playoffs. I just think we meet in playoffs a lot, which is interesting. But regardless, he's really good, and he's also the commissioner of the league. We just always have close matches, so this is going to be a very exciting week 1. He's got a team starting with Chien-Pao, Pecharunt, Iron Moth, Blastoise, Landorus, Terra Hisuian Decidueye, Electros, Terra Frogadier, Berserker, Hisuian Zoroa, and Terra Necrozma. And the biggest problems on this team are going to be those first and last picks. This is the Chien-Pao team. Seems like I'm always going to fight that Chien-Pao in a season that I play. And yeah, it's still an issue. I have Tinkaton as an obvious wall for it, but I have a feeling my opponent is going to see that coming. And I think with the way the way my team is structured, Scarf is a pretty good option on it to outspeed Regieleki and boosted Greninja, but a Banded or Swordsdance set with some priority options also makes a lot of sense. The other giant threat is Terra Necrozma, picked up in the last round, and if you've been following the channel, you know this can be a big problem. Setup sets can just run through entire teams, and setting up isn't exactly that hard between Terra and Prism Armor, so I have to give this thing a lot of respect, make sure it doesn't get too much room to breathe. Other than that, Landorus is pretty threatening, but keep in mind this is a Sand Force only Landorus, it's not allowed to have Sheer Force, so it's less a super powerful special wall breaker and more just a solid mixed attacker, still pretty good. And then Iron Moth, always a big threat, that thing can be pretty hard to switch into, and Blastoise. I actually think Shell Smash looks pretty good to me, since I have a lot more focus on speedy offense as opposed to bulk. And I think Timid Blastoise, I'm pretty sure it can actually outspeed Regieleki at +2. So I think with those options in mind, my opponent can pretty easily settle into Hyper Offense as a strategy for this week, with a couple options like Assault Vest Electros or Assault Vest Decidueye to stop Regieleki and Greninja from completely going off. With that being said, this still looks like a good offensive matchup for me, because, well, Regieleki and Greninja can really go off if the right things are chipped down. So I'm starting off the build with Regieleki, which is, surprise surprise, Terra Ice. The set is pretty basic. We have Volt Switch and Thunderbolt as stab options for either early game pivoting or end game cleanup respectively. I have Rapid Spin for hazard removal, which is why I have Boots for this set, and Terra Blast Ice hits all of the electric resists at least neutrally. It's a super effective hit into both Landorus and Decidueye, which were the important targets I wanted to be able to take out. This set has enough speed to outrun +1 Iron Moth, so yep, this should just be a good, fast attacker in the matchup. And we'll just move right along, like I said, to Greninja, which I have bringing a Battle Bond set this week. Greninja's dual stabs are almost completely unresisted in this matchup, so if I can get the Battle Bond boost along with the Life Orb, I think this could be my endgame sweeper. I will need chip on anything bulky, like any of the slow Assault Vest candidates and Blastoise, but if I can get that chip, Greninja looks really scary. Surf and Dark Pulse cover most of the matchup, especially scaring that Iron Moth, Landorus, or Pecharunt, and then Sludge Wave is coverage for the Decidueye, or I suppose Terra Fairy Necrozma. Water Shuriken helps me pick off boosted threats, and after a Battle Bomb boost, it should out-prioritize Chien-Pao's Sucker Punch because we outspeed, so we can potentially play Mind Game with that. Once again, I have enough speed for Iron Moth, so this should be another very strong attacker in the matchup. Unlike Regieleki, which I could see doing some pivoting early on, I expect to keep Greninja tucked in the back until it's time to sweep. So that's going to be 2 fast attackers, but let's just keep piling on here. Next up, I have Choice Scarf Salamence. I decided pretty early on that I wanted a Choice Scarfer for a couple of reasons. I needed a secondary tool to revenge KO Dragon Dance or Necrozma, and I also wanted something that can switch into Iron Moth safely enough and then outspeed and KO it in return. I had Chandelure in this slot at first, because it does kind of wall most Iron Moth sets, but I ended up swapping it out for Salamence because of its better matchup into Landorus and Decidueye. And also, Dragon is basically unresisted in this matchup. The only resist is Berserker, which is a fake Pokemon, so unless Necrozma tears into Fairy or Steel, Outrage spam is a real strategy. Since all I really care about is outrunning +1 Necrozma, I can afford to go Adamant with Salamence, and there isn't much that can switch in on an Adamant Outrage. This even has a potential to clean up as well, since I'm running Moxie to get some of that snowball effect. The set honestly feels pretty similar to Greninja, with a single KO boosting me up to a game-ending threat. Outrage is really what I'm hoping to click most often, but Dragon Claw provides a safer option in case I don't feel like I need the extra power. Earthquake gets coverage on Berserker and hits Petron a little harder if it shows up. And then Iron Head is really just for a Terra Fairy Necrozma, which I think is pretty likely. So this should be a good revenge killer and potential cleanup mon. So I did mention Choice Scarf Chien-Pao being kind of good into my team, and these first 3 brings absolutely do not help against that. But if the Chien-Pao is scarfed, I do have a pretty good answer to it with this defensive Tinkaton. We're mostly just going with a max Fizz-Def set to switch into Chien-Pao and take as many hits as possible. Yes, Banded Sacred Sword is still potentially a 2-hit KO, because of course it is, but once I know it's banded, there are ways I can play around it. The set kind of builds itself from there. Play Rough is the stab so that I can do good damage back to Chien-Pao, Knockoff forces progress on any switch-ins, Stealth Rock for similar reasons, and Encore because I could see Tinkaton switching into Necrozma, and I would love to lock bulky sets into their setup move before they can get going. We're going to keep rolling with checks to the big offense on my opponent's side, and I do need an answer into Shell Smash Blastoise. So for that reason, I am going to run Mirror Herb Ogerpon. If Blastoise ever switches in and looks like it could Shell Smash and blow up half my team, I'm switching to Ogerpon to copy the boost and KO it with Ivy Cudgel. Even if it's not Shell Smash, this is a good switch into Blastoise anyway, even if it's like defensive. And with this set, I should be able to force a decent amount of progress. I have Ivy Cudgel, hits pretty hard off max attack, and Zen Headbutt gets super effective coverage into every grass resist, besides Berserker, which, like I said, isn't real. Honestly, with those 2 moves, if I do copy the Shell Smash, Ogerpon has a decent shot at a full sweep, but obviously I'm not counting on that. Encore gives me another team slot that can set up Necrozma in, and Synthesis is there for recovery, so I can maybe switch into Blastoise and Landorus for a few extra times. The EVs are pretty standard. I could have gone max speed to tie Iron Moth, but instead I wanted a little more bulk, so I crept down to Iron Moth creeping Landorus. This isn't exactly the most cohesive set out there, but as a solid damage dealer with resist to water and ground, I think it has a place in this matchup. And then in the last slot, I felt like I needed a solid Iron Moth switch in, so I went with Specially Defensive Farigiraf. This should swap into Iron Moth decently well, and then we can threaten back with Psychic or heal up with Wish and Protect. Wish is also great to heal up teammates like Tinkaton and Salamence, which are good defensive checks to certain things, but they can get chipped down over the match. But Farigiraf also serves the purpose of being a lure for Chien-Pao. With a Color Berry, Farigiraf should take a Chien-Pao crunch as long as we're at decently high health, and then fire back with a 100 base power low kick. I went with this lure set because I wanted to minimize the amount of situations where I'm forced to swap to Tinkaton in on Chien-Pao. Tinkaton is a good check to it, but it's a bit of an obvious switch, and it can also get worn down after too many switch-ins. So hopefully I can just take out the Chien-Pao early with this interesting set. The ideal sequence is that if I swap into a special attacker, I get pivoted out on with U-turn or Volt Switch in Electros's case, and then the Chien-Pao comes out and takes the bait. I don't know if I can get that to work. Steve is a pretty good player and could scout out the set before committing to anything, but we're going to try it out anyway. One last thing, this is a Terra captain, but that's essentially not a factor in this game. Regieleki is always going to be the Terra, but at the very least Farigiraf can Terra Water to resist fire and ice moves from Iron Moth and Chien-Pao in some emergency situations. So that's going to be the team for week 1. It ended up being a little more balanced, still offensive, but with some bulky pivots in there. So hopefully I'm creating enough switching opportunities to force progress on my end. With the build out of the way, let's see how week 1 goes. Okay, so it's been a while since I've done post-com for one of these, so I am excited to do a little more deep analysis compared to my Wi-Fi battles. So team preview here. There aren't too many surprises. Maybe Electros instead of Decidueye is a bit unexpected, and it kind of sucks because I prepped a little more for Decidueye, but I guess that makes sense if you want Electros to be able to check any Terra type on Regieleki. It's not weak to anything. And the Terra type on Necrozma is Dragon, I see from the team preview. Can't say I expected that one, but I guess I have a pretty strong Fire, Water, Grass core plus Regieleki on my team. I'm not complaining though. Salamence is looking great with no dragon resists, and the Terra is eating a dragon weakness, so it's perfect. For the lead, I'm thinking Regieleki can just force damage early, so we're going to go with that. Good luck to SteveChuck. And that is a Landorus lead, so that's kind of awkward. We both know that I'm Terra Ice, so I could just let it rip and he probably either has to switch or die. The one doubt I have is that this could be Focus Sash Landorus, especially since it was the lead, and I could go down to a Stone Edge. But I don't think it makes sense for me to do much else. I'm just going to Terra Blast and see what happens. It is the Electros switch in, and with that Terra Blast, that's not that much damage. Looks like that's max HP Assault Vest based on the calc, so this is the Regieleki check. Makes sense. I really have no business staying in here, so I am just going to Volt Switch out for the extra chip, but I'm not quite sure what to switch into. This could be going for anything. I'm going to try Farigiraf, mostly because I think a Volt Switch could have been coming here. Ideally, like it would Volt Switch and I'd lure in the Chien-Pao. We'd proceed with the low kick plan, get that bait done and over with early in the match. But as you see here, it was just a knockoff that uses up the Colbur Berry. At least the Colbur Berry was used for something, right? We were going to take about 30% from it. That kind of sucks, but honestly, there's nothing on my team that was okay with losing its item. So Farigiraf taking this was maybe the best case. That knockoff did do a lot of damage too, so it is physical Electros. Well, I'm going to wish up if I can here. And the Electros is unfortunately going to be able to U-turn out for a bunch of damage into Chien-Pao. And I'm at 27% with no Colbur, so safe to say this plan didn't work out in the slightest. I could protect to grab my own Wish Recovery, but if it's Swords Dance Chien-Pao and I give it that free turn, I'm pretty cooked. That could actually just win the game from full health, honestly. So I just kind of have to switch into the dedicated check. Tinkaton is kind of forced in here. And Steve knows that, so he's going to double out to Landorus, and the Wish, of course, doesn't heal anything because I'm already at full. That was a pretty obvious switch on my end, but what can I say? Playing around Chien-Pao is hard. A good play by Steve there. That's the perfect way to play a Chien-Pao team. From here, I'm thinking about sacking Farigiraf to the ground move, but I do think rocks are pretty likely to come out from this thing. So I might as well switch out to something that at least outspeeds it on the next turn to threaten it. Regieleki is really tempting, but that feels risky. I'm not very bulky on that. So I will at least go Ogerpon as a mid-ground. Still resists the Earthquake. And we are going to see as I switch, the rocks do go up. So, makes sense. I've had to mind to lock it into rocks with Encore, but he could just switch this turn, wanting to preserve the Landorus. And I want to make sure I can do something, not just whiff an Encore. So I'm just going to go for the Ivy Cudgel. He's going to stay in, take a nice chunk from it, but U-turn does unfortunately do a lot and gets him back into Chien-Pao in a great position. So in hindsight, I would have loved to Encore there, but honestly, whatever. I think at this point, I do need to let go of the Farigiraf. From this low health, I don't think it's doing much, and I'd rather save HP on Tinkaton by not switching in. But with the free switch being sacked to the Sacred Sword, I can bring in Tinkaton just fine and threaten with a big play rough. So, as we're going to see here with the obvious switch from my opponent, I am able to get my rocks up. That is to Blastoise, which presumably came in to tank a hit or spin rocks away, but it's also possible that it came in seeing an opportunity to Shell Smash up. And that could literally end the game right now. Seriously, look at my team. If it's Timid Blastoise and it gets the boost, I cannot revenge it. So I have to go Ogerpon just in case. We should be fine against Rapid Spin anyway. We'll live that hit with enough HP left. Take rocks, and we are going to come in, take the Rapid Spin. Turns out that's what it's going for. So I'm going to make the assumption that this is a defensive Blastoise. The Mirror Herb was a little unnecessary in that case, but honestly, getting a +1 speed boost isn't bad here. Ogerpon could force some real progress right now. Blastoise probably doesn't want to take an Ivy Cudgel, so it is forced out into the Iron Moth, and knowing that, I did take the opportunity to heal up a bit with Synthesis, feel a lot more comfortable from this health. Now, unless it's Scarf Moth, I can guarantee a bunch of damage into it with Zen Headbutt. It won't be a KO, and I will probably go down a return, but I'm down to trade Ogerpon for big damage on the Iron Moth, as well as the damage we already got on Landorus. Zen Headbutt away, but that is actually going to be into the Electros. That was probably a scout for a Stomping Tantrum, but I'm happy to just grab the KO with an Ivy Cudgel. It's a nice KO, means that Regieleki is one step closer to a sweep with that specially defensive piece out of the way, and we're going to see the Iron Moth come back in. And like I said before, I will trade Ogerpon for the damage. So Zen Headbutt thankfully will hit. Does not as much as I was hoping for, and I go down to the Overheat. So there's some bulk on that, which makes sense. It's Draft League, it has some HP investment, potentially. But now we are at a 4-5 game. There is a Landorus at half and Iron Moth at a quarter at this point. I took some time to figure out what I want to revenge with, but I ended up going with the Salamence. It's not Greninja time yet, and Regieleki has some games to play if it comes in between like wanting to Rapid Spin and the Iron Moth still being able to KO me if it survives the turn. So I've just figured it's easy enough for Scarf Dragon Claw to just come in and either take the KO or force damage onto something else. So I'm just gonna rip the Dragon Claw, and he's just gonna let the Iron Moth go, and I get my Moxie boost. And then we see here that the Chien-Pao is going to be the revenge. That was a pretty good turn for me. I don't really have Iron Moth switches anymore, so I'm really glad he let that go. But Chien-Pao is back in here, and I don't have any information on it other than it has Sacred Sword. Could be Scarf, or it could be Ice Shard, although I didn't think that was super likely in this matchup, unless you're just concerned about the Salamence. Just to be safe, though, I think I am going to switch out. Since I'm boosted, I think my opponent is going to be incentivized not to double and instead just go for the KO with an Ice move. So I'm going to bring Tinkaton in. It's going to be able to come in on the Sucker Punch. Okay. So if it's not banded, I actually could have survived that. Maybe I should have tried to stay in and just go for a sweep there. But with Tinkaton in for free, we're going to see the switch out here, of course, to Blastoise again. And I'm going to make the quick double out to Regieleki. He made the switch to Blastoise last time. Probably wants to keep rocks off the field, so that was a pretty easy read on the switch on my part. And now that Regieleki's in, I really, really want the rocks out of here. If my opponent's best revenge into Salamence is Sucker Punch, there's a good chance I sweep with it as long as I don't take another chunk from Stealth Rock. So I'm going to spin. To be honest, I thought I was forcing the Blastoise out here, but instead it's going to flip turn out into the Necrozma. That feels like a very unnecessary risk with a Blastoise, but I suppose it worked out. So now the Necrozma is in, and if it's Dragon Dance like I'm expecting, I just need to prevent it from boosting twice. So I'm not going to play the Terra Blast mind game with his Terra Dragon. Even if I get the read right, I don't think I can necessarily two-shot the Prism Armor depending on EVs. So I'm just going to Volt Switch out, as he does in fact Terra Dragon. Tinkaton feels safe enough here, so we're going to switch that in, as he actually does set up the Trick Room. Weird. I guess it does make sense given my Regieleki, Greninja, Scarf, Salamence team with a fast defensive Tinkaton, so yeah. Anyway, if it does decide to set up, I can at least lock it in with Encore, and even if it decides to attack me this turn, I can still Encore it in and then react to whatever the attack is. So it's going to reveal that it's Trick Room, Calm Mind, a lot of setup. Luckily, I am able to lock it in. Thank goodness that set didn't go off. No Mental Herb or anything like that, so that's good. And from here, I'm just going to go for damage with the Play Rough onto the Terra Dragon, but it's going to be the Blastoise switch in. And honestly, I love chip on that. Let's try to get some more. Blastoise is going to hit a weak Surf, but I am able to get the knockoff and get rid of those leftovers. I'd love to chip this Blastoise down into Gren range. Between these two hits, I'm actually trying to gauge damage on the Blastoise, just figure out its EV spread. But Tinkaton is weak enough that the rolls are really overlapping here. It's pretty hard to tell. It looks like there's some defense investment on there, but it's really hard to tell how much. I kind of assumed it was a Fizz-Def Blastoise from this point, though. Regardless, I do love getting the chip damage on it, and I think my opponent also recognizes that this interaction is going well for me. He is actually going to flip turn right on out into Landorus, as I actually just whiff an Encore. That was meant to lock Blastoise into Surf so I could set rocks on it, but in hindsight that was kind of a misplay. I should have been going for damage in the first place, and he was also bound to switch out at some point, right? So I probably should have just been trying to catch a switch in, going for chip on the Blastoise, whatever, right? It's alright, because it doesn't matter too much. Trick Room is going to go down this turn, and regardless, Landorus can threaten me with an Earthquake if I stay in. I don't want to make another obvious switch, but I kind of need to preserve Tinkaton to keep the Necrozma in check should it get the Trick Room up again. Tinkaton is obviously also by Chien-Pao switch in, so I need to preserve that as well. There's a lot I need to keep Tinkaton for, is the point. My potential switch-ins are my 3 potential win cons. I don't want to sack anything off, but if I have to choose, I guess I'll go with Salamence. It would suck to lose my strongest attacker into the Terra Dragon Necrozma, but Greninja and Regieleki look so good that I can't just sack either of those off. There's a chance that maybe I'll just come in and immune the obvious Earthquake. Maybe? I'm going to come in, but no, Mence just gets caught with a Rock Tomb. That's interesting tech to lower speed. And I could maybe pivot Tinkaton in to play the Earthquake Mind game again, maybe come back in with Salamence on an actual Earthquake and outspeed from there. But I'm not going to play any more games with this. I'm just going to let Salamence go down to the second Rock Tomb for a 3-4 game. But with Greninja coming in for the revenge, I do still kind of like my position. I'm set up decently well to get a Battle Bond boost, kinda. Dark Pulse and Surf should both KO the Landorus here, so it's a matter of what could switch in to take either move. Blastoise can easily tank a Surf, but Chien-Pao actually eats a Dark Pulse pretty well, and it puts it into a pretty good position from there. It's a tough call, but I think I should lock in Surf. I need to make the plays to prevent Chien-Pao from getting onto the field. Tinkaton's already kind of chipped down. And I still don't know the Blastoise's EV spread, so there's a chance that Surf into Dark Pulse could KO that thing if it's just max HP. Surf is going to go off into the Blastoise, and that is a lot less damage than I was hoping for. It looks like 2 Dark Pulses from that range might not have even done it, which is not great. Turns out it is a mixed defense wall with a bias towards special defense. Even from here, yeah, Dark Pulse isn't a KO. I wish I had Grass Knot as my coverage right about now. But this is still salvageable, I think. If I can chip the Blastoise down with a Dark Pulse, I think worst case, it flip turns out, and he gets back into Chien-Pao or Necrozma, and I don't have Battle Bond active. I might have to sack Tinkaton, but Greninja might be able to get in after that, and then make something happen now that Blastoise isn't switching. So I am going to click Dark Pulse into it, which is going to fall short of the KO, but it does flinch. Yeah, that hard bailed me out of having to sack something, I'm pretty sure. But we take those. My opponent did reveal he was going for flip turn, so yeah, that was going to be a sack if he didn't flinch, I'm pretty sure. From this point, Surf KOs the Blastoise, and I am now Battle Bond boosted. So yeah, that was a pretty huge swing in my favor. Necrozma is going to come in. I can't quite KO from this range, even with Life Orb and Battle Bond, but I will do a ton of damage. Dark Pulse is going to go in, take it down to 15%, and of course, Trick Room is going to go up if it is left standing. Makes sense. This will stop a full sweep from your Ninja, but at the very least, I can at least go for a Water Shuriken, pray for 3 hits, and 1, 2, 3, we do get it. We're going to KO the Necrozma for a 3-2 game. So Chien-Pao is going to be in for the revenge, and with my speed boost and Trick Room up, Chien-Pao is going to be the first thing to move in Trick Room, which is kind of crazy. So I do need to make a choice here. I have a choice between clicking Water Shuriken for the chip damage, and then I will go down to the Chien-Pao. Then Tinkaton can actually clean house from there under Trick Room. Or I can go directly into Tinkaton now and save Greninja. I did decide on the latter for this battle, but in hindsight, I wonder if I should have gone with the Water Shuriken play, because Tinkaton comes in and takes way too much from the Sacred Sword. Yeah, that is banded Chien-Pao. At the very least, with 2 turns of Trick Room left, I can force damage onto it. Landorus isn't going to be able to take 2 Play Roughs, so I will just go for Play Rough here, take a chunk off the Chien-Pao. Thank you, Player, for hitting before Tinkaton goes down. So we are at a 2-2 game, but Greninja is once again in a pretty good spot to grab a KO. We are going to be here coming in on the last turn of Trick Room. Excuse the early switching here. Showdown's lagging a little bit on me. So here I am just going to go for the Surf to KO the Chien-Pao. Was a little worried for a second about, like, what if he undersped Greninja so Chien-Pao outspeeds in Trick Room, but I don't think it was worth considering enough to, like, get the Water Shuriken roll. So I'm just going to go For the Surf, Landorus switches in, so we are going to take that out. Excuse me, guys. Showdown's really lagging on me here. Anyway, Trick Room goes down as we take the Landorus out, which means Chien-Pao comes in and it outspeeds me, and it's banded. So, essentially, the game comes down to one last play. This is a 50-50. It's banded Chien-Pao, and it's revealed Sacred Sword and Sucker Punch. That's all it needs. So he can choose to either Sucker or Sacred Sword. I can either attack or switch. If he Suckers, and I use any move right now, he takes 2 KOs in 2 turns and wins the game, because I have all attacking moves on these last 2 mons. And if he Suckers and I switch, I can switch stall until he's out of PP. But if I switch and he locks into Sacred Sword, Regieleki goes down, and I have to play into the Water Shuriken to take the KO. Looks like I need at least a high damage roll on 3 Shurikens to take it. Of course, if he locks into Sacred Sword and I stay in, all I have to do is just switch in Regieleki and Revenge, because Thunderbolt easily KOs from here. So from these possibilities, I chose the one that gives me an out, even if I guess wrong. I switch to Regieleki on what I hope is going to be a Sucker Punch. And that is what it is. I will be switching until there are no more suckers left, but that means that I am going to be able to take the 2-0 win here. Another close one against Steve. Our battles always seem to come down to the wire like this. With the way this battle went down, I don't know if the win was possible without the Dark Pulse flinch. I do really think that's what pushed the game into my favor, since for most of this battle I feel like I was playing off the back foot. But I do like how the team came together. Outside of Farigiraf, which was a sketchy set anyway, everything did what it needed to. I later found out that Necrozma was weakness policy, which is actually super clever with Terra Dragon to like bait the player off from Tinkaton. So I'm glad I had Encore Tinkaton as my check for it. Ogerpon did really well too, chipped things down early into the game, and yeah, Regieleki and Greninja, they were such a cool offensive duo. Greninja is definitely the MVP of the match here, scoring 3 KOs and getting that crucial flinch on the Blastoise. So yeah, with all that said, GG to SteveChuck. Always love playing these close games against him. He's one of the co-hosts on the WCL main channel, which I have linked in the description, so go check it out to see coverage of this entire season as it progresses. Speaking of which, next week I am up against Hitmonchan, another coach I've matched into a bunch of times in this league. So join me next time for week 2, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching. See ya!